President, may we know if the distinguished lady from the city of Taguig and Pateros would yield to some clarificatory questions from this representation.
Gladly, Mr. President, we are ready and happy to respond to the queries of the gentleman from Bulacan.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, let me on the onset commend the efforts made by our distinguished colleague who shepherded this particular measure. Mr. President, this representation filed Senate Resolution number 556 in March 2023, asking and calling the Department of Energy, the Energy Regulatory Commission, and other concerned agencies to ensure continuous energy supply in the country, especially, Mr. President, during peak seasons and calamities. Mr. President, alam naman po natin, taon-taon na lang, merong kutob sa ating dibdib tuwing sasapit ang tag-init, tuwing sasapit itong mga kalamidad dahil alam naman natin ang kahalagahan ng ating enerhiya. At siguradong pag naririnig natin yung mga katagang red at yellow alert, tapos rotational brownouts, medyo nagwo-worry po tayo. So, Mr. President, my first question, and I just want to put this on record, because as I mentioned earlier, we filed a Senate resolution to urge the Committee on Energy to conduct an inquiry with regard to our energy supply. Mr. President, ang first question ko, ano ba yung intricacies o kahalagahan din ng supply natin sa enerhiya, and at the same time, how can this proposed legislation ensure continuous energy supply in our beloved country?
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Honor, this question, the illustration that you used is something that we have discussed quite a few times on the Senate floor, precisely during those times that we would hear of the red or the yellow alert, or that we would have visitors from different parts of our country, different parts of the country complaining about their energy problems in their areas. In fact, what I always discuss now is this, is how I say it. Normally, you will give a discount on something. You will offer a product or a service. Babawasan mo yung service mo, pero bibigyan mo ng discount yon, di ba? So, that's normal. So, for example, yung mga lumang stock ng tindahan, bebenta ng mura. Dito sa atin, yung kuryente, binawasan ka na nga ng kuryente, hindi pa nagmura. Pamahal pa ng pamahal. Exactly. So it like defies logic to the average Filipino why they have to live with this situation. So I answer in that way just to make it clear that I understand His Honor's concern. But let me start with the answer by defining what is energy security. According to the United Nations Development Program, energy security is the continuous availability of energy in varied forms, in sufficient quantities, and at reasonable rates. So yung sinabi ko kanina, ito din yon sa formal na sagot, di ba? Mm-hmm. Continuously available, so hindi pa putol-putol, in varied forms, meaning to say, dumadating yung energy from different, may renewable, may kung ano mang mga, that kasi goes into the continuous availability, and then insufficient quantities and at reasonable prices. So to answer His Honor's specific question on how this bill will address energy security, what I can say in one sentence is, energy security is addressed when we limit the vulnerability to transient or longer disruption of the energy supply. So, hanggat paputol-putol yung energy na nakakarating sa tao, hanggat hindi nila malaman na once a day, twice a day, once a week, twice a week, mawawalan silang kuryente, walang energy security. But what this bill seeks to address is availability of an indigenous source, which means sariling atin, na maaasahan natin yung supply. Because when we look at the current mix of energy that we have, we are very reliant on imported supplies. And current events will tell us that when there are wars, like what's happening in Ukraine, naapektuhan yung supplies, nagtataas yung presyo, and in one case, what country is that? Indonesia, yung nawalan ng Pakistan, Bangladesh? Pakistan. This is an actual situation that happened in Pakistan where they relied on energy supply, and then may kontrata na sila, may kontrata, signed contract, but the supplier just decided that there are buyers elsewhere that will pay more. So wala na silang, and it really disrupted the economy. So that is what we want to address when we support this natural gas bill. This will ensure that we now have a steady supply that comes from our own country. Hindi tayo vulnerable sa mga nangyayari sa ibang bansa. Yun lang naman yung, that's what I would say would be ito yung nakakaiba dito sa indigenous natural gas supply na ito. Sariling atin to. So I could be standing here promoting any renewable energy, which I would gladly promote, but if it is not indigenous, then we are still susceptible to external factors. So I think this is the most important feature of the bill, that sariling atin ito. Once we have discovered, and that is a big part of this bill is promoting the exploration, supporting this environment that will encourage investors to come in, then we are less vulnerable to these changes. And you know how it is. West Philippine Seas pa lang, yung wala na nga sa control natin, ang layo-layo sa Ukraine, ang daming nangyayari na wala sa control natin. But if a big chunk of our energy will now be sourced from within our own country, then we have more control over it, more control over the prices as well. But I have to say, it is not going to be the sole solution. It is just part of the bigger puzzle that will address or will bring us to the kind of energy security that our Filipino people deserve.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I appreciate that the distinguished sponsor defined energy security, because I think it is important to note that since time immemorial, we have been, Filipino people would not have that peace of mind, considering that you always question the continuous and stable energy supply in our beloved country. Now that you talk about energy security, na locally produced, environmental friendly, we can say that even if unpredictable yung nangyayari sa ating kapaligiran, mayroong badya ng giyera, may badya ng pagtaas ng krudo sa ibang bansa, hindi po tayo naapektuhan. But I'm also aware, Mr. President, and I would also get it from the distinguished sponsor's statement a while ago when she made mention about reasonable
Prices.
Yes, a rate, Mr. President, no? Kasi binanggit niyo kanina, Ginoong Pangulo, binawasan ka na ng supply, tinaas yung presyo. Para talagang hanggang ngayon, ang hirap po i-explain sa taong bayan. So, ang next question po dito, if this will become a law, tataas ba yung presyo ng kuryente? At pag tumaas ulit yung, because this is a clean energy, and usually pag sinabing clean energy yan, sigurado yan, mas mataas ang presyo. At pag tumaas ang presyo niyan, ipapasa lang din yan sa mga consumers, especially dun sa mga nasubukan na natin, no? For example, yung mga coal-fired projects na mga nakaraan, pag sila ng stranded cost, yung stranded assets nila, nandun na, pasa ulit sa mga consumers. So what's gonna happen, Mr. President, on this particular issue?
Mr. President, To answer that question, I wish I had first of all, I wish I could draw on the spot. Dapat marunong tayo nun, but I'll just have to explain it so I can help His Honor visualize it, because this is how I see it. From the time of exploration till the time that the electricity is delivered to the consumer. So tayo, sa bahay natin, di ba? Bahay natin, bahay ng mga Pilipino. Ang dami ng pinagdaanan yan. Kumbaga, ang daming mga traders involved,
Yes.
no? To put it simply. So that is, I think, crucial in our explaining it to the Filipino people. So, yung una dito, sa left side, yung mag-i-invest. And this bill is creating an environment where we will really attract investors. Kasi, para
For
mag-invest
natural
sila, so, para sabihin nila na, I wanna use an example that is easy for people to understand. Magtatanim tayo ng miracle herb. So, para mag-invest ang mga tao magtanim ng miracle herb, kailangan maniwala ang investors or ang farmers na magpapatanim doon na may bibili ng miracle herb na yon, di ba? So, ganun din. We want to convince investors that come in, we're providing a investor-friendly environment, and of course, they will take it on their own to do whatever scientific, technical inspections they need to do to see if it's a worthwhile investment for them. So from the time they start exploring, and then maka-jackpot sila, makahanap sila, alam nila yung percentage niyan kasi they are familiar with this. The people who will go into it have technical expertise. They will determine what are the chances of success, and from the time they are able to extract gas, it will then be delivered to the power plant, and then the power plant will then sell this to a distribution utility, and the distribution utility will now sell it to the individual. So lahat yon may pagdadaan ng proseso, lahat yon may kontrata. And these are the contracts that are scrutinized. So the first contract would be the service contract between the government and the private investor. So may mga terms yan to ensure that it is benchmarked with global standards. So hindi pwedeng imbentuhin yan. Hindi nila pwedeng sabihin na ang markup namin dyan is 1,000%. May global standards yon. And that will be scrutinized by our government agencies. And then, after that is the gas sales and purchase agreement between the indigenous gas supplier and the power plant. So yan din, ine-negotiate din yon. Kasi kailangan nga reasonable fees because at the end of the day, the concern of His Honor is
Yes.
very valid. Because kung
Yes.
hindi man negotiate ng maayos yan, papasa lang yan sa tao, di ba? So these are negotiated supposedly with very strict terms.
Perhaps the more to be more accurate about what I wanted to accomplish is the fact that at the end of the day, we will be able to protect our consumers and at the same time get the best services. Kasi ganun
Of
yun
course.
talaga eh, no?
Yeah.
Madalas parang tayo naman eh, sa mga Pinoy, okay na rin magbayad ng extra basta mas maayos na
oo.
serbisyo. But at the same time, yun lang po, no? The safety nets are there to ensure that our consumers are protected, Mr. President.
That is correct, Your Honor. And just to complete my illustration is after that, there is still another agreement, which is the power supply agreement between the gas-fired power plant and the distribution utility. So, lahat ito may mga terms na kailangan reasonable, and maybe at a later point, because I know His Honor said that you just want to have a general understanding.
Yes.
If His Honor so desires, we can explain further. Kasi when I was a new lawyer, these are really the type of contracts na buwan-buwan tinatapos. Like, uupuan talaga natin yun para maintindihan natin. But that's what I know His Honor wants the Filipino people to understand, na hindi basta-basta lang yan.
Yes.
Klaro dapat yung terms at reasonable yung presyong lalabas dyan.
Tama. Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. President. Mr. President, let me point out dito po sa Section 21 of the proposed bill on natural gas supply, it gives indigenous natural gas priority over other conventional energy sources like coal and imported gas. Mr. President, will this prioritization provision provide an unfair advantage to private companies that produce indigenous gas?
Mr. President, that is a very important question that requires a honest and detailed answer. I'll answer that again by using an illustration. Many times, through the serious efforts of Senator Cynthia Villar, we've discussed agricultural bills. And this representation has made interpellations based on our experience on sustainable development goals, which includes food security. So when we talk of energy security, just like food security, ano ba yung pinaprioritize natin? Ilang beses tayo nagkaroon ng hearing, umabot pa to sa Blue Ribbon, if I'm not mistaken. Yung presyo ng sibuyas, parang, correct me if I'm wrong, Blue Ribbon ba yun or Agri? Pero lumaki yan talaga, di ba? Because parang the accusations were that they were traders that were hijacking the market, and it was really a problem for our local farmers because hindi na sila makakompete sa presyo. So I'm going to use the example of sibuyas to help explain the answer. Why do we care what the price of the local rice is, bigas, or sibuyas, or tomatoes? Why do we care? Why does DTI bother to have a regular check on the prices available in the market? Why? Because this is what people spend their money on. Araw-araw binabayaran nila yung kinita nila, yan ang gastos nila. Same with the electricity bill. Monthly nga lang ang dating ng bill, hindi naman every day na parang palengke. So it matters to them na yung presyo is stable and reasonable. And so, for it to be stable and reasonable, we need to have indigenous sources. It's like protecting the farmers also. Kung meron naman pala tayong pagkukunan na local, why not? So our job as legislators is to craft laws wherein the desired action or the desired outputs that we want, that we believe will support our goals. And in this case, it's creating an environment where we have reasonably priced energy sources. Then that is the law that we must create. And His Honor is very familiar that there are laws that we provide incentives, there are laws that we, maybe if not even incentives, pero we strengthen the powers of a governing agency para mabigay nila lahat ng support, para mapadali yung mga applications, right? That's why we have this one-stop shop supposedly for businesses. So that is similar to what we're trying to do here. We want to create an environment where maging madali para sa investors na mag-invest in exploring indigenous gas in our country, and then it becomes a reasonable, a profitable business for them so that our Filipino people can avail of this energy source na galing sa Pilipinas na mas mura at mas reliable.
And gaano po kalaki ito, Madam, Mr. President, itong industry na ito?
Now, but up to what kaya? I mean, best case scenario. And 3,000 is currently what percent? So currently, our indigenous gas production is at 13%.
13.
And that is how many megawatts?
That's the current, Your Honor, Mr. President, right?
Yes.
The current.
And that translates to 3,000 megawatts. Let's keep it simple. 3,700 megawatts.
Megawatts.
The goal is to have even up to. Okay, the goal is to have up to 25,000. So from 13 to 25, doble, tama ba? Is that accurate? I'm just for the record, it's Yusek Garin that I'm asking because I am not an expert of these numbers. So
Same-
we're
same
relying
here.
on DOE, no?
Same here, thank you, Mr. President. So from 13%, which is 3,700 megawatts, the goal is to reach 25,000
Sorry.
megawatts.
So from current capacity of 3,700, in 2050, we're looking at 19,700. So that's 3,700 to 19,000. That is, quadruple? Tama ba?
More.
Oh, so
More.
ganun kalaki, Mr. President. So that is how much we can actually potentially extract within our own country. And if I may explain this further, let's keep in mind that the energy demand in 2050 will not be the same as now. Eh dati, Mr. President, nung bata ako, I think kayo rin, paano magbukas ng can opener, di ba iniikot? Nagulat na lang ako about 15 years ago, not even in the may debaterya na pala noon. Sabi ko, kailangan pa pala ng battery para paikutin yung, yung can opener. So everything now is being mechanized and very little of it is done through physical effort, no? So you can just imagine the demand for energy just to do the usual things that we're doing. And plus the population increase, which in the Philippines is not really getting any smaller.
Yes. Mr. President, let me also point out our Paris Agreement, Mr. President, which the distinguished sponsor and I are very much aware that the Philippines is a signatory. Governments are supposed to speed up the transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy by 2030. And that's the reason why I think the Energy Regulatory Commission is, ERC set a policy on energy diversity and renewable energy use. Ang tanong po, Ginoong Pangulo, ay bakit po natin binibigyan ng prioridad ang indigenous natural gas sa panukalang batas na kokontra doon sa ating pinirmahan at sinang-ayunan na Paris Agreement at yung ating pag-shift sa mga renewable energy, Mr. President?
Thank you for that question, Mr. President. I asked that also when I was studying this bill, no? Hindi ho tayo expert sa energy, so nag-aaral din tayo. And my concern is also, as a renewable energy advocate, is whatever steps we take, ideally should not take away from our path towards a greater shift to renewables. So to be clear, under the Philippine Energy Plan, our goal is to source 50% of our energy from renewables by 2050. Currently, we are at, is it 5%? Okay, so currently we are at less than 20%, and with 26 years to go, the goal is to reach 50%.
50.
So, needless to say, there's a lot that must happen to make that transition. And it is this representation's desire and objective that the focus on this bill should not take away from those efforts. In fact, in the budget hearing, I will also be pushing for answers to ensure that we are also making the appropriate investments for renewable, because that is the plan. But to be clear, Mr. President, and this is what the experts tell me, because tayo po, nung umpisa pa lang natin naririnig yung solar, tapos yung wind, syempre exciting naman, di ba? It looks so clean, it looks so natural. So I was always curious that what does it take to set that up? And in fact, Mr. President, it requires a lot of funding and support. Infrastructure, technology developments, and innovation, and storage. So for example, sa solar, the more solar panels we have, the more it will produce. But that also depends. Sa araw na katulad today na there's no sun, then very little yung production. On sunny days that napakadaming maraming makukuhang solar energy, if we don't have the storage, and the experts tell me, DOE tells us that we don't, natatapon lang yun. Ganun pala yun. And Senator Amy isn't here, so she can correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection in my discussion with her is, pati sa wind, may mga tapon din pala. Kasi nga, kung wala kang proper storage and then hindi mo hindi mo ma-load yun sa grid, wala rin, hindi rin makakarating yun sa end user. So there's so much pala that goes into the end users being able to avail of this energy that was sourced through renewables, which the least of which is this infrastructure and the storage facility. So my point is, we must continue to build on that. Hindi yan dapat napipigilan. But in the meantime, may pangtawid tayo. Yung pangtawid natin is itong indigenous natural gas.
That will not affect our...
That should not affect. Kaya nga during the budget, I would be more than happy if His Honor joins me in ensuring that kung ano man yung malalaan na pondo para sa renewables, tuloy-tuloy dapat na mailalaan. But interestingly, and I have about 2 more points to make on this question His Honor has posed. One is, and I'm going to lose my train of thought, so give me a second to write down my notes.
And I'm glad, Your Honor, because when you were delivering your sponsorship speech, I was listening attentively to your sponsorship speech, and I wrote down on my notes, Mr. President, that you made mention that the country needs natural gas to transition to more renewable energy sources.
Yes,
And,
I said that.
I had this note, and I think you and I would agree that this is the globally acceptable trend. And again, the only thing that I'd like to raise is that we are not in any way changing our position or no longer honoring our commitment in the Paris Agreement, Mr. President.
Okay. So my 2 points that I wanted to raise, the difference between this transition fuel and renewable is renewables are not baseload fuels. In other words, hindi yan yung maaasahan mo na nandyan parate. Pangtawid lang sila.
Okay.
So yung pang baseload natin would be, unfortunately, coal, oil, gas. Correct, no? Yan yon. So parang the least of all the evils na talaga, yung ito na, si gas. Kasi sadly, wala pang technology, tama ba, kahit sa ibang bansa, for renewable to be pang base load until magkaroon na tayo ng mga storage. And I asked, ako, ba't di ba madaling bumili pa ng more batteries? Hindi kasi you need so much. And I would be more than happy to spread into the records, like, what is that amount, what is that capacity? Kasi I asked them, kasi it's like, we're not there yet, unless the technology changes. The amount of batteries that you need to store renewable is really huge. So we cannot, even today, pag sinabi natin, the President has declared we shift to renewable as soon as possible, even before 2050. It's not gonna happen tomorrow because not only do we not have enough funds siguro to, I say siguro because pag napapagkunan pala yung PhilHealth, bigla palang may pera. So I need to say that because that is important to all of us here today, right? But I'm saying it's a huge amount of money, and then you'll still have to order it anyway. You'll still have to create that infrastructure. So that's the one point.
Okay.
So you need that base load fuel, and natural gas is one of them. And then the second point I want to make is the reason this will not take away from our road to renewable is, may investors naman na papasok. In fact, binabayaran pa nila yung gobyerno. Currently, how do I say it? 60%?
Kano?
Yeah, of the net sales. 60% of the net sales go back to government. So with renewable, we need to provide the infrastructure. We need to provide these batteries that I was referring to dito. Bumabalik pa yung pera sa atin. So it's kind of a no-brainer, Mr. President, that we do this for now, for energy security, and as a transition to renewables.
Yeah. Let me ask this question, Mr. President, because the bill prioritizes indigenous sources of natural gas, and we have been hearing the distinguished sponsor explaining on how we will go through this. But with the Malampaya field likely to be depleted by 2027, Mr. President, are there currently any other viable local sources of natural gas?
So currently, the consortium handling Malampaya already has I'll call it an extension of their contract that allows them to, is it even explore or drill? Already drill, no? It's already drill because there's already a confirmed source. So we already have that, and that will extend the life. Yeah, by next year there will be drilling, and I think in my speech
will extend the
I
life.
indicated already that the life will be extended by a couple of years. So imbis that instead of it
2027,
being totally
probably
depleted,
another 2-3 years.
more,
Okay.
more, oo.
Yeah, I'm just being conservative about estimates. And if so, Mr. President, what are the projected timelines for their development, and how will they meet the growing energy demand in our country?
How soon can you get confirmation dun sa bagong? Next year. Yung mga bago.
And this would
Okay.
be enough to
So-
address the gaps.
So drilling next year, drilling that starts next year will hopefully have immediate results. So then we would be able to give more updates on how much can be extracted from those new sources. But that's precisely why this bill seeks to create that environment which is open to investors, all kinds, anyone. It's not, there's no one group monopolizing it. Even the existing Malampaya consortium does not have a sole monopoly over the exploration. And then later on, in the bill, it also creates this environment where there will be purchases of the gas, because like I said in answering the very first question of His Honor, magpapatanim ka sa mga farmers, dapat siguraduhin, gusto ng farmers malaman na, maliit nga lang kita ko sa bigas, pero at least may bumibili. Kung may miracle product ka dyan papatanim sa akin, siguraduhin mong may bibili. Baka mamaya, Senator Joel, ikaw lang bibili.
Baka may ibang organisms na kasama, so wala ding bibili. Mr. President, I don't want to take much of the time of our sponsor and our colleagues. Perhaps may I just ask one more question, which is very close to my heart, and that is the protection of our workers. Mr. President, the natural gas industry may, or perhaps may involve intensive work requiring the use of heavy equipment, possible exposure to extreme weather conditions and gas emissions, and perhaps high levels of natural gas exposure can cause natural gas poisoning, etc. So we wanted to emphasize the importance of the law that we passed here in the Senate, and this is one of our pet bills, itong occupational safety and health standards. So may we ask, and just for the record as well, does the committee report include safeguards for our workers, Mr. President?
But currently, Mr. President, because this representation had the privilege of visiting the Malampaya platform, they're extremely strict with their protocols, their safety protocols, precisely to ensure the safety of the workers, Mr. President. In fact, we are told that our Filipino crew there is in high demand in other countries because the experience they have gained is world-class. And any other exploration or drilling venture would grab them in a second. And this is also because of the standards that have already been set. So those standards are already in place. There is no intention to weaken them. If anything, we will even strengthen them because, as His Honor said, these are very technical activities which we would want to ensure are safe. But His Honor also had a question about emissions. Would His Honor like me to comment quickly on that?
Sure, Mr. President. At the end of the day, Mr. President, we would like to ensure that the law that we pass on standards for occupational safety and health standards will be strictly implemented, Mr. President. Because I was also looking at, Mr. President, Your Honor, on Section 34 of the committee report that mandates the permit holder and participant to implement an acceptable health, safety, security, environmental management system in accordance with applicable Philippine and internationally accepted standards. So it's here, Mr. President. It's just that perhaps at the proper time, this representation would like to perhaps introduce an amendment kasi nakalagay po dito, for this purpose, the DOE, DENR, DOH, nakalagay naman po, and other agencies shall ensure compliance with this requirement. Perhaps other than DOE, DENR, and DOH, pwede po nating isama yung DOLE na kung saan binibigyan din natin ng pondo taon-taon para magkaroon ng labor inspections nila para masiguro na yung standards and safety practices ay nai-implement, Mr. President.
Actually, Mr. President, we do have that. Section 5 states that an interagency health, safety, security, and environment inspection and monitoring team shall be created to monitor and enforce compliance with established standards to be co-chaired by the DOE and the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. And then the members shall include DOLE.
Okay.
That is Section 5, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for that. And
And I'll just add the item I wanted to mention on carbon emissions.
sure.
On
Mr.
carbon
President.
emissions, for natural gas, 1 molecule of natural gas produces 1 molecule of carbon. While for other fossil fuels, 1 molecule of fossil fuel produces more than 1 molecule of carbon.
I will not pretend that I am understanding your Honor's statement, Mr. President.
Siguro dahil-
but I'd be glad to get a copy of it, Mr. President, as we move forward and study this measure further, Mr. President. And I'd like to I take this opportunity to thank our distinguished colleague, the sponsor of the measure, for patiently answering my questions, Mr. President. And with that, may I be allowed, Mr. President, to end this interpellation and perhaps ask again at the proper time or introduce
Yes.
amendments na lang, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
President.
Mr. President. I appreciate His Honor's questions. I hope that it also added to the wealth of knowledge that collectively we all have to understand this bill. I have to admit it is technical, but we will try our best to always simplify. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senators Villanueva and Pia Cayetano, Majority Leader.
Yes, Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2790. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
Yes, before we